Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. In the last part we learned, how did the company start collecting revenue, after becoming Diwan of Bengal region, and what was the impact of Mahalwari and Ryotwari system on the peasants. Crops for Europe. By the late 18th century, company officials started realizing that countryside of India could also grow crops, which were high in demand in the Europe region. They started pressurizing the farmers in different parts of India for producing different crops. To name a few, jute in Bengal, tea in Assam, sugarcane in United Provinces, which we today call Uttar Pradesh, wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra and Punjab, and rice in Madras or Chennai. Demand for the Indian indigo. In the 13th century, Indian indigo was used by cloth manufacturers in Italy, France, and Britain to dye cloth. Since it had to be imported from India to the European market, price for obtaining Indian indigo was very high. Hence, very small amount of indigo was imported from India. As an alternative, cloth manufacturers started using another plant, called woad, to make violet and blue color dyes. Woad was easily available in the European market, and was cultivated in northern Italy, southern France, and in parts of Germany and Britain. Seeing the competition from indigo plant, woad producers in Europe persuaded the governments to put a ban on the import of Indian indigo. However, the cloth dyers preferred the use of indigo as it produced a rich blue color, compared to pale and dull color from the woad plant. Finally, in 17th century, European cloth manufacturers convinced the governments to lift the ban from the import of indigo plants. Now, European countries were cultivating their own plantations. France began cultivation in Saint Domingue, in the Caribbean islands, Portuguese in Brazil, Britain in Jamaica, and the Spanish in Venezuela. Plantations also came up in many parts of North America. As the plantations grew, demand for Indian indigo also grew. Around late 18th century, as Britain began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded, demand for cloth dyes also expanded. While the demand for indigo increased, its supply from West Indies and America collapsed due to different reasons. In addition, between 1783 to 1789, the production for indigo plants fell by half in the world. Britain turns to India. Since the production for indigo was declining in the world, and demand was at its peak, East India Company started looking for ways of indigo production in India. In the last decade of 18th century, indigo plantations expanded rapidly in Bengal, and Bengal indigo soon started to dominate the world market. This was such a huge difference that in 1788 only about 30% of indigo was imported from India, whereas by 1810, the indigo import was 95% from India. Seeing the profit growth, many company officials and British citizens settled in India to start their own indigo plantations. They were known as planters. How was indigo cultivated? There were two systems of indigo cultivation, Nij and Ryoti. Under the Nij cultivation, the indigo planter bought or rented the land from zamindar and used to hire ryots or peasants for production. On the other hand, Ryoti system was a contract-based system where ryots or peasants signed a contract to grow indigo on their land and hand it over to the planter. They were given cash amounts as loan, with a due rate of interest, and were required to harvest indigo. Contract also used to commit the indigo production on 25% of ryot's land. The planter would only provide the seeds and drill for the cultivation, and cultivators used to do the remaining work of preparing the soil, sowing of seeds, and looking after the crop. However, both the systems had their own problems. Under the niche cultivation, the planters who owned or rented the lands had to arrange for a lot of peasants, bullocks, and resources for the cultivation. In addition, they also had to ensure the soil fertility, as indigo could only grow in fertile soil. On the other hand, under the Ryoti cultivation, the loan given to peasants was never ending. As soon as one batch of indigo was prepared, the planter gave them another loan and kept exploiting them under the contract. The planter also forced the peasants to grow indigo on the fertile land. Indigo developed large roots, which drained all the water from the rice crops. Once indigo plantation was fertilized, ryots could not grow rice or any other crop in their lands, as the soil was dried out with indigo. The process of indigo production. Indigo villages were usually around indigo factories that were owned by the planters. Once the harvest is completed, indigo plants were taken to factories and dropped in vats or a large bucket. In the first vat, indigo leaves were soaked in warm water for several hours for fermenting. After fermentation, rotten leaves were taken out, and the fermented liquid was taken to the second vat, located just under the first vat. In the second vat, the fermented liquid was continuously beaten up and stirred with paddles till it turned green and then blue. When the color used to turn blue, lime water was to be added to separate indigo flakes from the water. After adding lime water, a muddy sediment used to get settled at the bottom, and water used to come at the top surface. The sediment was indigo pulp. The water was drained out, and the indigo pulp was transferred to another vat for pressing as the final product for sale.